It is a Tuesday evening. Not a particularly bad day, not a particularly good one. You are sitting at the kitchen table with your child, a stack of books nearby, maybe a worksheet the teacher sent home. The lamp is on, the dinner dishes are still in the sink, and your child is staring at the page the way someone stares out a car window on a long drive. Present, technically, but somewhere else entirely. You point to a word, they sound it out slowly, laboriously, like they are lifting something heavy. Then they forget the beginning of the sentence by the time they reach the end. You start again. They start again. And somewhere in the quiet space between their frustration and yours, you feel this small, uncomfortable thought creeping in. What if I am doing this wrong? What if something is wrong with them? And maybe, because you are the kind of person who carries these things, you have already started searching late at night, reading forums, watching videos, wondering whether your child just needs more time or a different approach, or whether reading is simply going to be one of those things that comes hard to them the way it seemed to come so easily to other children. Here is what I want to say to you before we go any further. That moment at the kitchen table is not evidence of failure. It is not a warning sign about your child's intelligence. It is not proof that you are an inadequate parent or teacher. What it is, actually, is one of the most honest moments in all of education, because it strips away the performance of learning and shows you what is really happening underneath. And what is really happening is this. Your child has not been taught to read in the way their brain actually learns. Not yet. That is not a dramatic claim. It is simply a direction. The myth we have all inherited. There's a story that has been passed down through generations of classrooms and dinner tables, and it goes something like this. Some children are readers, and some children are not. Some children pick it up naturally, almost as if literacy were a personality trait they were born with, like having blue eyes or a good sense of humor. And the others, the ones who struggle, who resist, who stare at the page with that faraway look, they need to try harder, want it more, sit still longer. We inherited this story. Most of us never questioned it, but the story is wrong. Reading is not a natural human ability. Let that settle for a moment. Unlike speech, which children acquire instinctively by simply being immersed in a language environment, reading is a technology. It is an invention. Written language is only a few thousand years old, which is nothing in the timeline of human development. The brain has no dedicated reading circuit the way it has circuits for recognizing faces or processing sound. Instead, when a child learns to read, the brain is doing something remarkable and genuinely effortful. It is borrowing regions that evolved for entirely different purposes and teaching them to cooperate in a new way. This is what the cognitive scientist Stanislaus Dehaene calls the brain's reading network, a coalition of regions that were never designed to work together for this purpose, but can be recruited and trained to do so. The word for this capacity is neuroplasticity, but you don't need the technical term to understand what it means. It means the brain changes. It literally rewires itself through experience. And that rewiring does not happen on a fixed schedule. It does not happen the same way for every child, and it absolutely does not happen faster just because an adult raises their voice or adds pressure to an already difficult situation. So the slow reader at your kitchen table is not refusing to learn. Their brain is in the middle of an architectural project. And architecture, as anyone who has ever watched a building go up knows, requires sequence. You can't hang the windows before you've laid the foundation. What actually slows children down? Before we talk about what to do, it helps to understand what is actually happening when a child reads slowly or struggles to retain what they have read. Most people assume the problem is vocabulary or effort. The child simply does not know enough words, or they are not trying hard enough. And while vocabulary certainly matters, the deeper issue is almost always something called decoding fluency. Decoding is the process of translating the visual symbols on a page, letters, letter combinations, into the sounds they represent. And when that process is not yet automatic, it consumes an enormous amount of the child's mental bandwidth. Think of working memory like a small table in the middle of the brain. On that table, the brain can only hold a limited number of things at once. When a child is still laboriously decoding each word, figuring out that the letters THROUGH somehow produce the sound through, that process takes up most of the table. There is no room left to understand the sentence. There is no room to enjoy the story. There is no room to be curious. This is why fluent readers experience reading as effortless and pleasurable, while struggling readers often describe it as exhausting. They are not reading the same activity. They are doing two fundamentally different cognitive things and calling them both reading. The goal, then, is not to pressure a child to read faster. The goal is to make decoding so automatic, so deeply practiced, that it requires almost no mental effort at all. When that happens, the table clears, comprehension moves in, and something else moves in too, something that no worksheet can manufacture: interest. The 5-step system. Step 1. Build the sound foundation before the letters. The single most important predictor of reading success is not letter recognition, it is phonemic awareness, the ability to hear, distinguish, and manipulate the individual sounds inside spoken words. Before a child can connect letters to sounds, they need to be comfortable with the sounds themselves. This sounds almost too simple to take seriously, but it is the stage most parents and even many teachers skip because it is invisible. You can't see it. There are no letters involved. You are simply playing with sound. Clap out syllables in words during dinner. Ask a child what word you get if you take the first sound off the word cat. Blend sounds together out loud and let them guess the word. None of this requires a book. All of it is laying the groundwork for everything that comes later. William James, the psychologist who shaped so much of how we understand habit and attention, wrote that the art of learning is the art of knowing what to overlook. He meant that the mind naturally filters information based on what it has been prepared to notice. When a child's ear has been trained to hear sounds clearly, their eye begins to follow more naturally. You are not drilling them, you are tuning an instrument. Step 2. Teach phonics systematically, not incidentally. Once phonemic awareness is developing, phonics, the relationship between letters and the sounds they represent, can begin in earnest, and the key word here is systematically. This is where a lot of well-meaning approaches go sideways. Children get exposed to letters and words in a piecemeal way, a little here and a little there, sight words mixed with letter sounds, mixed with whole word memorization, and the brain never gets a clear map. It gets fragments, fragments that don't connect. The brain learns by building patterns. Every new piece of information it receives gets filed in relation to what it already knows. When the phonics instruction has a clear structure, simple consonant-vowel combinations first, then blends, then digraphs, then long vowel patterns, the brain can build a reliable internal map. Each new pattern fits onto the one before it like bricks that were actually designed to fit together.
Confucius said something that has echoed through centuries of educational philosophy. Learning without thought is labor lost. He was pointing at the difference between passive exposure and genuine understanding. Systematic phonics is not about making a child memorize rules. It is about helping them think clearly about how language works, so that when they encounter a new word, they have tools rather than guesses. Step 3. Practice fluency through repeated reading, not more new material. This is the step that surprises most people, and it is the one that makes the greatest difference in the shortest amount of time. Most parents, when they want their child to improve at reading, give them more books, more new material, more new words. The instinct is understandable. If you want to get better at something, do more of it. But research in reading development consistently shows that fluency builds fastest through rereading familiar material, not through constantly encountering new text. When a child reads the same short passage multiple times, they are not just memorizing it, they are training the decoding process until it becomes effortless on those specific patterns. And those automatic patterns transfer. The child who has read the same simple reader 5 times begins to recognize common letter combinations and sight words everywhere. The table in their working memory clears a little more each time. This is essentially the principle behind spaced repetition, the same mechanism that makes music practice and athletic training work. You do not get better by constantly doing new things. You get better by returning to the same things until they become part of you. There is no shame in reading a favorite book for the 10th time. That 10th reading is where fluency lives. Step 4. Read aloud together and make it a conversation. Here's something the data on reading development points to repeatedly, and something that gets underemphasized in the urgency to teach decoding. Comprehension and motivation are built through dialogue about text, not just through processing text. When you read aloud with a child, when you take turns, when you stop and ask, "What do you think happens next?" or "Why do you think she did that?" or simply, "Does that remind you of anything?" you are doing 2 things simultaneously. You are modeling fluent reading, giving their brain a template to work toward, and you are building what researchers call reading comprehension schemas, mental frameworks the brain uses to make sense of narrative, cause and effect, character motivation, and sequence. Carl Jung wrote about the power of the story as the native language of the unconscious mind. He was pointing at something fundamental about how human beings make sense of experience. When we encounter information inside a story, it lands differently than when we encounter information as a list of facts. It connects to feeling, and what connects to feeling connects to memory. A child who has had hundreds of rich conversations around books does not just read better, they think better. Their inner world becomes more populated, more textured, more curious. Step 5. Protect the intrinsic motivation at all costs. This last step is not a technique, it is a philosophy, and it may be the most important thing in this entire video. Intrinsic motivation, the desire to read that comes from inside the child rather than from reward or pressure, is fragile in its early stages. It's like a small flame that can be nurtured or snuffed out by the conditions around it, and once it's extinguished, it takes a very long time to relight. Excessive pressure kills it. Constant correction kills it. Comparing a child to other children kills it. Forcing them to read material they find boring kills it. And perhaps most subtly, treating reading as a performance, something they do to be assessed, rather than something they do for themselves, kills it. The research on motivation in education is consistent on this point. The psychologist Edward Deci spent decades studying what drives human beings to engage with difficult activities voluntarily. His findings were clear. People engage deeply and persistently with activities when they feel a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence, and a sense of connection to something that matters to them. Not because they were rewarded, not because they were afraid of consequences, because the activity itself felt like theirs. Let your child choose some of their reading material, even if their choices seem trivial to you. Comics count, joke books count, books about dinosaurs or football or whichever narrow obsession currently occupies their mind count enormously. The topic is not the point. The habit of reaching for text voluntarily is the point. And that habit, once established, is one of the most compounding advantages a child can carry through their entire life. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire and still found time to write some of the most psychologically clear thinking in human history, described the disciplined life not as one of constant force, but of returning, quietly and without drama, to the things that matter. He was writing about his own mind, but it applies here too. You are not trying to force a child into reading. You are trying to create conditions where reading returns to them again and again
as something that feels like theirs. The resistance is information. One more thing before we close. If your child resists reading, that resistance is worth listening to rather than simply overcoming. Resistance in children is often a communication. It says, "This feels too hard," or "I feel embarrassed," or "I do not believe I can do this," or "This does not feel connected to anything I care about." None of those messages are defiance. They are feedback. And they are actually gifts if you are willing to receive them without judgment. Ask not how to make the child do the thing, but how to understand what is in the way. Sometimes it is a gap in foundational skills that needs to be filled. Sometimes it is anxiety about being seen to fail. Sometimes it is simply that the books in front of them have nothing to do with their world. Each of those has a different answer, and the child who feels understood rather than managed will always learn more willingly. The truth at the center of all of this. Here is what I want you to take away from this video, not as a strategy, but as an orientation. Teaching a child to read is not about making them faster. It is about making the act of reading feel possible, and then natural, and then, eventually, like something they chose. Speed is a byproduct. It is what happens when decoding is automatic, when confidence is intact, when curiosity has been given permission to lead. You cannot rush it into existence, but you can build the conditions that make it inevitable. The 5 steps in this video are those conditions. They are not a race, they are a sequence, and every child, given the right sequence at the right pace with someone who believes in them quietly and consistently, learns to read, not despite their struggles, but often through them. Closing. If any part of what we talked about today touched something real for you, whether it is the child at your table or a version of yourself you recognized somewhere in this video, there are deeper questions worth sitting with. Why do some children who struggle early become the most voracious readers as adults? What is happening in the brain when a child finally breaks through? And what does it mean to help someone learn without accidentally teaching them to fear learning? Those questions live in the next videos on this channel, not as answers handed to you, but as conversations worth having together. Thank you for being here and for caring enough to ask better questions.